testimony. Now, have you got about 4 hours? I'll tell you what. Hey, I was raised a Catholic. Everything on here is exactly right, except for Mary Royster. Everything's perfect. But Mary is a blessing to me. Hey, we worked together for quite a few years. She's an absolute blessing. I'm going to turn this thing off. I'm going to turn that off and wants to play again. But I was raised a Catholic in a Catholic family. We had 15 kids in our family. Wow. 10 boys and 5 girls. And I'm the last boy, the 10th boy and the 13th child. Now, talk about love. My mom and dad, this is an interesting thing. My dad was born in 1889. My mom was born in 1899. There was 10 years difference. Well, when my dad was 10 years old, he babysat my mom because they were neighbors. So he changed her diaper. Hey, he took care of her. He took care of her. Hey, but here's the amazing thing. When she was 15 years old, he was 25, he married her. Then they had 15 kids. And then in 1969, he buried her. Is that an amazing thing? He saw my mother from when she was born until the day she died.
Oh my God.
Isn't that something? But you know, I was raised a Catholic. We were all Catholic. We had a wonderful priest, Father John. And I was a soprano when I was a kid. So I used to stand up in front of the church and sing Ave Maria and stuff like that. But I could hit a high C when I was a kid. Now I can hit a low C. Or no C. But anyway, the Catholic Church really never had a grip on me. I loved it. It was showtime. You know, we went to church and my family was the choir. I had 2 sisters that were organists, fine pianists. And so our family was the choir in the church. And so I was raised with that. It was just wonderful. I mean, you know, when I was a kid, I used to pray, Father in heaven, can my whole family be with me? Can we have a place called Garden Village? Because our name is Gardiner, and my dad was the first person to build in Garden Village. And they named it after him. It was Garden Village. So I prayed that prayer, but of course, as you grow up and you find out that everybody gets scattered, you know, World War II came along, and we had a lot of problems in the country. But I'm still praying that same prayer, that I would be together with my family. Isn't that something? Amen. But you know, when I left home, I studied music most of my life, went to the Northern Michigan University and studied opera, and I wanted to sing opera, I thought. And so I went to Chicago, and I was in some of the show business things at the State Theater in Chicago. But then I had to leave Chicago because the wife that I had married could not stand the humidity. So we went to New Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so I studied at the University of New Mexico, and they said, well, if you want to sing opera, go up to the northern part of New Mexico and sing up there. And I went there, and they said, no, you have to go to San Francisco. So I went to San Francisco because I wanted to sing in the opera. And sure enough, I got to sing in the opera. Che bella cosa, n'aiuta sole, Marian torrente va, bolin bolita, so popolesta, e paleggiano vesta, che bella cosa, n'aiuta sole. Anyway, that's enough of that. You know, when I was singing in the opera, I just had bit parts, sang in the choir, and I really couldn't make a living. And so I want you to know that when you are predestined, God is with you whether you're a sinner or not, because He has a plan for your life. As a matter of fact, we're all sinners. None of us deserve heaven. But because of Jesus and predestination, a lot of us, and I believe a lot of us here tonight, have been predestined to follow Jesus. And so I got a job driving bus in Oakland, California. I was one of 1,500 bus drivers They had 1,000 buses, and we carried 250,000 people every day from Oakland to San Francisco. Well, I liked that job because when we were out in the hinterland, I could sing to the people on the bus. They used to ride my bus just so I would sing to them. But anyway, this is a cute story. When I went there, I was the only person in our class that had never driven a bus. All the people in the class were Greyhound bus drivers and did other things. And so in the morning we studied fare zones and tickets and tokens and all that stuff. But in the afternoon we had to drive the bus. Now our teacher was a black man named Clem Anderson. And he said, don't worry about it. He said, we would rather train you than have you come from Greyhound. Because the people from Greyhound had some fairly bad ideas about how to drive, cut corners, do that kind of thing. Anyway, we went out in the yard, and those guys knocked over 1 or 2 cones in the yard. I knocked over all the cones. Now this guy prophesied. He didn't know it. I believed the Lord was with me all my life. Yes. But this guy prophesied, and he said, this guy is such a lousy driver, they'll make him general manager. And you know something? 20 years later, I was the general manager. Isn't that something? All because I treated people with respect. I was never robbed driving a bus. I knew everybody on the bus. I'd say, how you doing, young man? Come on aboard. What's your name? And he'd tell me his name. I'd whisper it and go to the back of the bus, you know. So I knew everybody. And that's been something that I've done all my life. If you want to get ahead in this world, be polite and be engaging. Engage people. Talk to them. And I found that it was a wonderful thing to do. So the boss called me in after I was there 6, 8 months. And when drivers did something wrong, they got to come see me. Well, I got to come see me one day, and I was so worried. I said, what did I do wrong? I've been running according to the company rules all the time. And the boss called me in and he said, oh, you didn't do anything wrong. He said, I wanted to meet you. You're the only guy in this division that I've never met. Because I never had to come see me. So he started promoting me, and I went right up the ladder. And so in about 20 years, I went from being a driver to the general manager, reporting to the board of directors, 7-member board. And I just had an absolutely exciting career, loved it. But I never heard a person come to me or mention Jesus. Nobody ever ministered to me in the Bay Area. No one. And so I retired in 1988. I've been retired 30 years. Can you imagine being retired for 30 years, getting a pension? Yeah. That was unbelievable. So anyway, I started serving. I found a Christian. I bought a trucking company, found a Christian man, and he gave me a hose. This is a funny story. He had one truck, I had 10, and he said, Mr. Gardiner, will you hire me when you have a job too big for your trucks so I can work for you? I said, absolutely. So he brought me a garden hose back in 1988, and I'm still using that hose today, and there isn't a hole in it. That hose works perfect. That's God. Amen. But there's so many things about that. He was ministering to me for 3 years, wanted me to go to church, wanted me to do this and that, and I refused. I said I was a Mormon, I was a Catholic, and I'd just as soon pass it up. And so, unbeknownst to me, my son was living in Bakersfield because I had gone through a divorce, like a lot of people do, and my wife is living in Bakersfield, and my son was on drugs, and he got saved by a couple of Baptist kids that came by. And they took him to church, and he got saved, and he started a Bible study in a school that wouldn't allow it. And finally they had to allow it when he had 200 kids in the Bible study. So they had to allow it. And today he's a missionary. He's with YWAM. He's one of the big wheels in YWAM. Travels all over the world. But the experiences I've had, I've always considered them to be adventures. I never looked at a problem like it was a problem. Pastor, you're pretty new here. I haven't seen you. Of course, I haven't been here for years. How long have you been here?
I don't know, a couple of years.
A couple of years, yeah. Yeah. So I mean, we work our way into the job, and if we're blessed, if the Lord is with us, we're absolutely blessed. And so I went through life like that, just being blessed, one thing after another. Now the Mormon church, I never joined the Mormon church. I mean, I never sought to join the Mormon church, but I was one of these guys that was very friendly, and I was living in Concord, California, and we had an earthquake. And what happened is the girder in the bottom, in the floor that comes up from the cement, popped up the floor about this high in the kitchen. It's pretty hard to work in the kitchen when you're trying to climb over a bump. So I decided, well, I have to work on this thing. So I tore up the floor, and just as I did that, man knocked on the door, and he said, I said, what are you doing? He said, I see you bringing all this stuff out of the house and buying lumber and that. And I said, we had an earthquake and it busted up the floor in our house. And he said, well, let me help you. Now, he was an old man, and I was in my 20s, late 20s. And I didn't know he was a Mormon, but he was an educated man. He came and he helped me. I didn't know how to sweat weld copper. He taught me how to sweat weld copper. And as spring came around, one day he came over and he says, Gene, I want to show you something. So I said, what is that? He said, come on, I don't want to tell you now. Come and see what it is. Well, what had happened is that 8 men from Ogden, Utah, all professional people, moved to Concord, California. And they bought a bankrupt housing development, 2 blocks with the streets, gutters, sewers, water, electric, everything was in. But the contractor went broke. These Mormons bought it. And so they were coming into Concord. Soon as school was out, sometime in June, they were going to start building their custom homes. Well, I was living in a $14,000 home, and if I stayed 1 year, they would take $1,000 off the mortgage because they had built hundreds of homes in Concord and they couldn't sell them. So I really lucked out. I had a very reasonably priced house.
Amen.
But they said, why don't you build a house up here on Mormon Hill? I said, well, I don't make the kind of money to build a custom house. He said, well, we're going to take you to our banker. So they took me to their banker, and the banker got my information from work, and I was a very faithful employee, never late. I mean, I really took my job seriously. And a couple of days later, the banker called me back and says, you're cleared, you can buy a $30,000 home. And I said, what? I said, I'm going to have a hard time paying for a $13,000 house. And he says, no, you're making the money, we'll make sure everything works for you. And so I was tempted, and then all of the Mormon guys came over and they said, you just show up for work and we'll build a house for you. Isn't that something? And I was absolutely amazed that they would do that. And they were all building, and if I had a girder to put up, it was way up in the air, they would come over with their ladders and stuff, and they'd pick the girder up and we'd lay it, you know, we'd have it done.
Wow.
They helped lay the cement block, they helped with the framing, and so after I built my house, one day they asked me to go to church with them. Well, what am I going to do? I accepted everything that they offered me. Was I not going to go to church? I didn't know anything about the Mormons. So I went to church. And what happened at the church is that they gave me 3 books, the Doctrine and the Covenant, the Book of Mormon, and the Pearl of Great Price. Those are 3 Mormon books that they live by. And the Pearl of Great Price talks about all of the good things you should do in your life. You shouldn't drink, you shouldn't smoke. There's all kinds of things that you shouldn't do. You should be a good husband. Everything that the Mormons do I thought was great. But when I read the Book of Mormon, I couldn't agree with it. I was raised Catholic. I knew who God was. I knew who Jesus was. They call themselves the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but that's not the Jesus we honor. That's not the Jesus we pray to. That's a figment of their own imagination. And so anyway, I was in the church a couple of years, doing great, sang in the church almost every Sunday. They loved me and I loved them, you know. I love you, a bushel and a peck. Remember that old song? And anyway, I was happy, not giving it a lot of thinking. I mean, I knew what I didn't like, but I wasn't at a point where I was going to tell them I didn't like it. Well, the guys came to me and said, the bishop wants to talk to you. I said, what does he want to talk to me about? And he says, you have to come in and see. So all my friends that helped me build my house went in to talk to the bishop, Bishop Arnold. And the bishop said, Gene, we've had our eye on you, and we would like you to come into a special program we're going to make just for you, so that in 2 years you'll be a bishop in the Mormon church. I said, what? A bishop in the Mormon church? Are you kidding? He said, no. I said, well, I've read all your books, but I said, I have a problem. He said, what is that? I don't believe in Joseph Smith.
Amen, by the way.
I said, I don't believe in Joseph Smith. They said, what do you mean? I said, well, Joseph Smith claims that he got these golden tablets out in the woods, and that God the Father and the Son appeared to him in the flesh. Well, we all know that God the Father is a spirit. Jesus is the physical representation of God the Father. And so I told him, I said, I just can't accept that. And then the serious question that came from the bishop is, well, then why are you here? And I thought about that, and I said, that's a good question. So I had to leave the church.
Praise God.
I left at their request. You know, they said, well, you really don't belong here. And I said, I agree. I mean, I never gave it a thought.
Right.
You know, you guys romanced me. I said, I was on a cloud with all the stuff you were doing for me, but that didn't mean I understood your religion. You know, back in those days, women could not go to heaven on their own. The reason men have plural marriages is because a man in good standing in the Mormon church can take many women to heaven. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? And of course they have marriage, I mean they have baptism by proxy and all this kind of stuff. You know, my folks were Catholic. I couldn't change that, they were dead. But they believed that Jesus was the Son of God and that God the Father raised him from the dead. Amen! So that was always a consoling thing to my heart. But so I left the Mormon church. And all I can say is that I got saved in 1991 by the man who worked on us for 3 years and we wouldn't accept. And how it happened was strange. My son Jason in Bakersfield went to the mission field in Australia, and he needed $2,500 for transportation. And I told him, I said, son, why do you want to do that? I was kind of sour on religion. And I said, you have a beautiful girlfriend here, marry her. I'll get you a great job at our company. He said, Dad, I've been called. I said, what are you talking about? Who called you? And anyway, he told me that God called him and he had to go. And I said, well, if I give you $2,500, you're not calling me next month and saying, Dad, I got to come home. I can't stand this. Well, you know, he went to Australia and he was there for 4 years. And he went way up in the ranks. He took people all over the world. He tells stories you wouldn't believe in Korea and Singapore, India. India was one of his favorite countries, you know, and had all these wonderful stories. Well, the guy that was ministering to us all this time that we wouldn't accept, I invited him over for a barbecue one night. We were going to have steaks. And I told him, I said, now if you bring up Jesus' name tonight, there's the gate. Arrivederci. And it just happened that my son called because he had come home from the mission field and he was at his church down in Bakersfield. He says, Dad, we're on our way home. I said, you are? He said, yeah, me and my bride, I got married. Didn't I tell you? Oh. And he married a missionary girl. Well, we were having the barbecue. They were coming home. And Wayne brought up Jesus about 10 o'clock at night. We had already eaten. And I said, Wayne, what's the agreement? He says, I want to tell you something, Gardiner. You're incorrigible. Nobody can help you. And they walked through the gate, stormed out, and they left. Almost like a stage play, there's a knock at the door, and my son and his bride are there. And they came into the house, and they were on their honeymoon. And so my wife, Audrey, said, well, we're not going to stay here if these kids are on their honeymoon. She said, I'm going to go with Elena, the lady that just left with Wayne. She's going to a Women Aglow meeting. And I'm going to go to that Women Aglow conference with her. And I said, well, where does that leave me? She said, I don't care what you do. Well, she was upset with me for having Wayne leave. you know. So I thought about it, and I said, I'll call Wayne. I said, Wayne, what are you doing tomorrow? He said, well, I'm working at the church on Saturday, and then I'm going to church on Sunday. And I said, can I join you? I said, you know, I don't want to get tangled up in another religion, but I'll go with you. How's that? He said, Gino, come on, glad to have you. So I went to church that Sunday morning, and the preacher talked on divorce is not the unforgivable sin. Now, if you're a Catholic, when you get divorced, you have to get an annulment from the Pope, or you're living in adultery, or something's wrong, and your kids are bastards. I didn't want that. I said, you got to be kidding. I'm not writing a letter to the Pope. My children are not illegitimate. I love my kids.
Right.
So that was out of the question. I wasn't serving in the Catholic Church anyway.
That's right.
And so that minister started to preach, and Wayne poked me and said, are you okay? I said, yeah, I'm fine. What's wrong? He says, you're crying. I said, what? I did this, and tears were running down my face. And he said, that's the Holy Spirit working in your life. I said, you have to be kidding. He said, no. Well, as soon as that sermon was over, I ran down to the altar and I said, Pastor, can I say the sinner's prayer? Isn't that something? So right then and there, I said the sinner's prayer. Now Audrey was with Women Aglow, and on the way home from the Women Aglow, she was riding in a van with 7 other women, and there was a woman in the van that was an ex-prostitute, and she led Audrey in the sinner's prayer on the way home. Isn't that amazing? So when we got home, she didn't tell me what she did, and I didn't tell her what I did, but I was just bubbling, you know. I was so happy. The grass was greener, the trees were beautiful.
Yeah.
I said, I'm going to open up the Bible and find out what it says. Well, when I read the Bible, I couldn't find the Catholic Church in there. Oh. The only thing I could find that the Catholic Church resembled was the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Because they had the long robes and they had all of the fancy stuff.
Right.
And that's what the Pharisees and Sadducees did. And they wanted to look holy. I don't believe in piety. I'm not looking for piety. Are you, Pastor? No. I'm looking for people who love Jesus. Who will serve Him. Who will go out and serve Him. Well, I no sooner got saved and I ended up in the prison ministry, and I've been in the prison ministry now almost 30 years. I ministered in San Quentin, at death row. I ministered all over the United States in prisons. And I love inmates for this reason. You're not inmates, but these guys were caught doing something wrong, and they can't hide their crime. They're being punished for their crime. So the varnish is off the door, you might say. When you talk to them, you're talking to the unvarnished truth, because they recognize the fact that we're sinners. And so I tell these inmates, I said, when you get out of prison, now that you're born again and saved, right here at Lawrence County or Mercer Prison, I said, you can walk into any church, walk up to the pastor and say, Pastor, I'm a felon. I just got out of prison, but I want you to know something. I found Jesus. I'm born again and saved. How many people in your church are here and they're not saved? I want to tell them that He saved me.
Amen.
I mean, I'm a felon.
Amen.
One guy served 33 years in prison, and he's a pastor today.
Praise God.
Now, these kids know because they went to our church, but I brought some inmates to church one morning, and they sang in their typical way, swaying and clapping, "Whose side are you walking on? I'm walking on the Lord's side. Whose side are you walking on? I'm walking on the Lord's side. I walk, I walk, I walk, I walk. I'm walking on the Lord's side." Anyway, we had the whole church singing that song in like 10 minutes. Hey, but these are inmates. Now, the problem inmates have is a problem of low esteem. Even though some are born again and saved, they're ashamed of their crime. Even though I told them, hey, the Lord forgave you, that crime is as far away.
Yep.
But the problem is that any application that they fill out, I think that just changed recently, but they have to put down that they're a felon and they serve time in prison. Because there's a question on the application, did you ever go to prison? And they feel duty bound to do that. And so I always tell them, I said, your personal presentation to a boss is going to be the most important thing you ever do. When you walk into a place and you shake the boss's hand, you know, and you say, I'm here and I want to work. And the boss said, what can you do? Whatever you want me to do. Will you be to work on time? Yes, I work as unto the Lord. Whew. I had a black man go to work right over here in American Cab, which is right here in Sharon. American Cab is a company here. And one of my inmates, he got a job there. And there's a lot of black people working there, and he was black. And when the boss took him on the floor, he accepted him, even though he had a felony in his record. There were two black ladies running machines above the machine that he was running. And these ladies said, don't tell me you're bringing us another dud. That's what these ladies said. And the boss said, no, this man is going to work. And Jesse said, yes, I work as unto the Lord. You know, they gave him that look. So anyway, he got the job, and in 2 weeks they doubled the production. And those two women were so proud because they had somebody that came to work.
Amen.
Now, all the union guys in the shop disliked him a lot. And because he seemed to have favor. He got a couple of promotions, made more money. About a year later, the business agent quit. And wouldn't you know, the union came to him and asked him if he wouldn't be the president of the union. And so he called me up. I'm his mentor. I ran a big company. I know all about unions. And I'm not against unions, but I know all about them. And he said, what should I do? And I said, well, tell them you will accept after they hear what you have to say. And he says, what am I going to say? And I said, this is what you're going to say. If you want me to be your union boss, if you come to work late, I won't represent you. I mean, if you come to work late one morning because you have a problem, that's fine. But if you're a typical person coming in late too often, I won't represent you. And I said, if something goes wrong on the job and we find out that you're sleeping on the job, I'm not going to represent you. And he went through this litany that I gave him, and they voted for him 100% to be the boss.
Wow.
But he was working under the Lord.
Amen.
Now, I want to close with this story because this just happened in the last 6 months. Now, we have family all over the country. Audrey and I left Newcastle to go down to Texas first, then we were going to go over to California, then Alabama, and then Georgia, and we had all these kids to visit. So we got into Dallas, Texas, a little town called Prosper, just north of Dallas. We got in on the 19th of December, and we were going to go shopping before Christmas, because you weren't going to carry all that stuff with you, you know. And Audrey's birthday was on the 20th. And so we got there for the 19th so we could celebrate her birthday in style. She was 87 years old, and everybody thought, you know, I don't know how many more years she's going to have, but let's really celebrate. So they got a great big sheet cake. We had a house full of people, and they had 87 candles on fire. Wow. You could feel the heat in the house.
Wow.
That's a lot.
So the next night, the 21st, God came into my life. I had a dream. Now, I have never been a person to grieve. I've always looked for the silver lining. I always had a good thing to say. I always wanted to smile and shake people's hands and share the love of Jesus with them. That's after I got saved. And but this night of grieving, I cried in my dream all night. And I cried because this was going to be my year of grief. Well, what is that all about? I'm going to have a year of... Have any of you grieved, seriously grieved for a loved one, a child, a husband, a wife? Yeah, it's a terrible thing to grieve because I lost my helpmate. Hey, I met Audrey in a bar. Back in 1982, we married in 84. I was singing as a singing bartender in Jack London Square, if you've ever been to Oakland. I met her in a bar, and we started dating. We never went back to the bar. God must have arranged it. We never went back to the bar. 2 years later, we got married. But anyway, this grieving was going to be my year of grieving. And so
You lost your dad.
on the 23rd, which is a couple of days later, we had one of our grandsons that came from California, had to get back to work. And so we took him to the airport in Dallas, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, and when we got back home it was like 5. And when we walked in the house, I heard crying and whimpering. I said, "What is that?" And I said, "Is that your dog?" And the dog was there wagging his tail. No, it wasn't the dog. I went into my bedroom, and there Audrey, now we had just a regular sized bed, a regular bed, and the room was not big. There was about this much space between the bed and the dresser. She had gotten up to make a visit to the bathroom, and when she turned, this one foot didn't turn. It was stuck in the carpet, I guess, and she fell on her own leg and broke her hip. She broke her hip right at the joint, right at the hip joint. The femur is that big around, but where she broke it, it also tied in to the hip, the way it goes from the outside into the knob that goes into the hip joint. Terrible break. So we called 911 immediately, and we got the paramedics there and the fire department, and they couldn't get around her to get underneath her to pick her up. They were going to slip a board under her. And so they had to push the bed up against the wall, you know. Right, when you're traveling with your kids, you don't get the best accommodations sometimes. But anyway, they finally got her picked up and they took her to a hospital. Baylor Scott White was the name of the hospital. Brand new, the most beautiful hospital I've ever seen. And the doctor there was Dr. Kane. He took x-rays. He was an orthopedic surgeon. And he says, "You're lucky I'm on duty," because they said, "I do a perfect job on this kind of thing." That's what the doctor said. You know, well, here I'm in shock. You know, I mean, my wife just had this terrible accident. She's 87 years old. And they did the operation the same day we brought her in, on the 23rd of December. And when he came out, he said, "I'll tell you what, it was touch and go, but she made it." But he said, "We lost her a couple of times because I think we put her too deeply into anesthesia." And that turned out to be the case. She survived. And so we stayed at the hospital 1 week because they wanted her to go to a nursing home that had physical therapy. And they finally found one a week later. So we moved on the 29th from the hospital to Settlers Ridge. Settlers Ridge is one of the nicest nursing homes I've ever run into. The food is so good, you'd go there to eat if you had a chance. Most nursing homes, they scrape their plate off in the garbage can. But we were there at Settlers Ridge for 21 days. And while we were there, Audrey could not recover from the anesthesia. She would see it snowing in the room. She'd see butterflies flying around and birds zipping by her, and she worried about one hitting her, you know. It was all because of the anesthesia. It took her over a month to recover from the anesthesia they did on the 23rd of December.
Wow.
Well, we were going to go home. She could go in a wheelchair. She could walk a little bit in a walker, maybe go 10 feet. And she wanted to go home. Really what she was saying to me is, "I want to go home to the Lord." But because Audrey loved the Lord. But we were going home, so I flew her home. And I had driven to Texas. I had my car there. And so they had a big dinner for her, and she couldn't enjoy it because she was really hurting yet. She flew home. My daughter came with her, and I picked them up. Drove home, picked them up at the airport. But you know something? You talked about love. Do we understand love? I'll tell you what. I've never been a caregiver. I never even gave it a thought. I mean, why would somebody be a caregiver? I know nurses are caregivers. All the people working in nursing homes are caregivers, but I was never a caregiver. I never wanted to be a caregiver. But here I am in a position that I have to be a caregiver. And so I was with my wife 24 hours a day. Settlers Ridge had a beautiful room for us. I would say huge room, this big, 2 beds in it. We had everything. The problem I had is that she would wake up 4 or 5 times a night crying or some problem, so I'd have to attend to her. And I learned all the things that a caregiver has to do. And our love, it got deeper. I can't explain it. I just loved taking care of her. I did. Every night I'd give her a kiss, and she'd break into the biggest smile. You'd think we were on our honeymoon. You know, understanding love is something that most men don't know about. Women are caregivers. They have to raise the kids. They have to do all the stuff that most people don't do. But here I am, a caregiver. And I was just amazed by it. We went home, and sometime in late March, we went to Dr. Mark Gardiner. He's an orthopedic surgeon here. He works through UPMC. Maybe some of you know him. And so in order to get cleared from our medical plan, we had to go to an orthopedic surgeon here to find out what Audrey's status was. Well, she was only home a month and a half or 2 months, but she was just getting alive and just happy about everything and wanted to do housework, and she did. I couldn't stop her. She did her exercises. She was getting back to her old self. We went to this doctor, and he looked at her, took the x-rays, and he came out and he said, "There's nothing I can do for her." And I said, "Well, why?" He said, "Because she's healed."
Amen. Thank you, Lord.
I want to tell you something. When she broke her hip, I was on my knees so much. I was just crying out to the Lord. You know, and you love somebody, you want them to be healed. Now here's a strange thing. This is really strange. After she went to that doctor, she went home, started doing her housework. Now Audrey made a path. We have a house that has 2 acres, and on one side of the house is the woods. Well, Audrey went into the woods about 15 feet and made a path 465 feet long in the woods. This path is in the woods. And she'd done that for 18 years. That was where she prayed. She would be out there praying to God and having a good time. And 2 months after she got that clearance from Dr. Gardiner, she was out walking in her path. I saw her through the kitchen window. And I said to myself, well, I'm going to go out and mow the lawn, so I'll be out there with her. And so when I went out to mow the lawn, 10 minutes later, I couldn't find her. Where the heck is she? And I looked all over, and finally I went way down into the woods, and there she was, laying at the base of this tree. The tree that she was at was a good tree, but there was a dead tree behind that tree, 20 feet. And up in the air, about 30 feet, there was a branch this big around, as long as this room, and that branch broke off the tree. The minute she went past that tree to dump her leaves and branches from her little wheelbarrow, working the path, and it scalped her. It cut the hair right off of her head and busted her face all up. She was bleeding from her eyes, from her nose, from her ears, just bleeding. And I called 911, and they said, clear the blood out of her mouth and give her mouth to mouth. I said, I can't, she's gone. They said, what do you mean she's gone? I thought you said she was there. I said, she's gone. Her spirit's gone. She's not alive. She's not here. She's dead. She's in heaven. They did not understand that at all.
Amen.
And they said, no, you clear the blood from her mouth and you try to give her mouth to mouth. Well, I couldn't do it because she was already getting rigid. And I couldn't even get my finger. I did try to pry her jaw open, I couldn't do it. She was dead. She was gone. So we called, so the coroner came, state police and the local police, they called it a crime scene. Well, that's what they do. When somebody dies like this, they call it a crime scene because in some cases the husband might kill the wife. I don't know, you know. And so they came out there and then they made me leave anyway. My wife was gone.
Gene, how long ago was that?
That was 2 months ago. That was May 17th. 17th was just a couple of days ago. This is the 20th today. Yeah. So it was 2 months ago that she died. 2 months ago. And you know, here's the strange thing. It's another answered prayer. When we came home from Texas, we both knelt down, and this was our prayer. And this is what she wanted me to say. She said, Father in heaven, we're getting old. And we don't want to end up in a nursing home, staring at a blank wall, drooling.
Amen.
Lord, we serve you. Take us home. When you want us, you take us home. That's what happened. He took her home.
Amen.
Yeah, the odds of that happening would be better for you to win the lottery than it would be for something like that to happen to her. Yeah, the moment she bent over, that branch came down and killed her.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
So even in a tragedy, God's working. Because she was losing her memory. She was 87, which is typical of people 87 years old. She was losing her memory, but she did not want to go to a nursing home. 2 of her sisters went to a nursing home. She didn't want a nursing home. She didn't have to go to one.
That's right.
She got to the end of her path. You know, we all have a path to walk. That's what I say. She walked to the end of her path. By world, she went right up to the Lord.
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Praise God. Father in heaven, my prayer tonight is pretty much what Pastor said earlier tonight. He started with Ezekiel. Oh, Ezekiel, God, the wrath of God is punishing all these nations. But then he talked about John, and he talked about love. When you have your spouse, love your spouse. You may not have that person the next day. Yeah. I saw my wife 10 days before she died, and she was gone. And sometimes at night, I try to put my arm around her. She's not there. I said, Lord, you got her. She's with you. And I pray that everything's going fine for her in Jesus' name. So that's my prayer for you, to love one another. That's what we're supposed to do. And love sometimes requires caregiving. It might require doing something for somebody else, which is nice. That's what I've tried to do all of my Christian life. I've always been out ministering to people, helping people who are sick. I've seen many people die. I know a guy one time that was dying, and the daughter said, no point in going in, he's in a coma. We haven't talked to him in days. And I said, well, the only reason I'm here is that he told me about his past. He said, I was a trucker, and I had a woman at every stop, every truck stop. And he said, I had a party, I paid, I gave the family the money, but my love was not really with my family. And so I wanted to talk to him before he died. So I went in his room, clapped my hands like this, Harv, how you doing? He woke right up. I said, Harvey, you told me something once, and I want to correct it. He said, what's that? Well, you told me you were a lousy husband, that you violated the marriage vows a lot, that you didn't really love your wife that much or your kids, and you were interested in driving that truck and getting out of town. But I said, today, you can leave a beautiful legacy for your family. And he says, what is that? And I said, you could give your life to Jesus. You know why? Because all those sins that are bothering you right now, He'll forgive them. He'll cast them away as far as east is from the west. He'll bury them in the deepest part of the sea. And I said, you can leave this world, go right to heaven, and all your kids will know, because I'll tell them that you found Jesus and you died in the arms of Jesus.
Amen.
And he said the sinner's prayer.
Amen.
He died the next morning. So that's what we're supposed to be all about, folks.
Amen. You're right.
It's not about, yes, church is good. The Bible says, do not forsake the gathering together. We have to be together because we can encourage each other. But I want to tell you something. True love is in the heart. It can't be faked. It's got to be the real McCoy.
Yes.
And you know, a lot of times in our minds, Satan drives these little wedges in your marriage. You don't like the way your wife cooks. She doesn't like the way you drive. You don't like the way she irons her shirts. There's 1,000 things that Satan will put into your marriage to destroy your marriage. Recognize that and say, no, Satan, I love my wife, and because it's a logical thing. When you love somebody, you have to say it in your mind. When you buy a car, you're willing to pay the price. When you get married, you have to be willing to pay the price. Thank you, Lord.